Right, this is just a little video that I've put together to break down the economy equation that I've built for Freelancer Aftermath. This is quite a bit of a divergence from a lot of the traditional techniques that have been used in vanilla and discovery. And I'm just going to go through each one of the different variables in this equation and give you an idea of what each one does and how it can be tweaked as well to change the distribution of our sale points. Very important point about this curve to begin with. It's designed for a single source economy, and what I mean by that is that for each commodity there will be an origin point. There may be other sell points throughout the universe, but they all have to fit within the regime of this formula in order to make this formula work effectively. And I'll compare this to some graphs on the previous mods to give you an idea as to why that is and why we've gone for this particular model. So up on the right here we've got the formula itself. I appreciate it looks like a bit of a mess, but as you can see here it's split into two major components which I've highlighted here. So the first bit is basically a little bit of Excel wizardry that allows us to shape the curve. So we can take our travel times, which I've listed in this column here, and then dump them into this equation here, and calculate them all across a lot of our variables that we can set manually up here, and it can change the shape. And I'll go into how we can tweak that later, because you can actually shape this curve not just into an S shape, but into a logarithm or into an exponent or a plateau. On the back end of this, it takes the numbers that this front bit spits out and translates that into our multipliers, which is the eventual number that we need really to put into our game file, which you can see down here actually is represented by a market good INI line, which we hope at some point we'll be able to export directly into the game files. Okay, so just taking you through the first step of the formula now, you can see up here, appreciate that all of this is quite an expanded version of this. This up here is not a representation of this. You can see I've got under the hood here. That means there's a lot of stuff going on in another tab that is not quite apparent, but I'll go through that as we go along. So selecting this again, you can see here we've got four main variables here that are used. So we've got acceleration, acceleration time, deceleration, and the midpoint. And one more variable used in this front end is also the travel time. It's not highlighted here, but it should be. So first of all, just to give you an idea of what some of these do on the left-hand side here, and this relates to the entire equation, not just the front end. We've got the maximum CS. So we can set the most amount of profit we want our players to gain over time by changing this figure. This will always be an absolute maximum, if not very, very, very close. And by changing this number, because it's integral to the formula itself, you will change the distribution of the entire data set. So it's effectively eating up the distances and spitting out CS values in relation to those distances as they increase. So if I bang in 1,000 in that, there we are. You can see the curve's shape is more or less not changed, but on the right hand side here you can see the CS values have increased from their start point. Yeah, disregard this, these are all -1s, but you can see here it starts to increase 12, 18, 19, 49, and you can see as we're going up in time, we're also going up in CS. If I bring that down to a more realistic figure, there we go, 420, we can see it starting at very small values and then increasing with time. This next one here, peak, honestly I wouldn't mess with that. Effectively the bones of this formula come from a business growth distribution curve, and really that is just an artifact of that. It should be set to 100% because 100% of 420 we want to be 100% for our purposes. Acceleration percent. Now this is the one that does still confuse even me. I'm not entirely sure what it does, but I'll show you what it does now. So if I change that to say 20%, you can see the front end of the curve has grown a little bit softer. So we're seeing that there's an increase. You can see the steepness of the curve has almost shifted to the left. So the front end of our data set is starting to increase quicker. So we can turn that to 30. There we go. So you can see that we're not getting such a soft start if we increase that. So as far as I've learned, this value only really applies to the front end of the curve, and I believe it's only really to do with keeping a certain quantity of the data set under 10% or to 20% or whatever you set it to. Then we've got the acceleration time. Effectively, what this is it limits, it forces values at each end really within that bracket to stay before the acceleration percentage. So if we increase that to 20%, you can see that it's moved a smaller portion of the curve under that percentage. So we increase that to say 50, you can see it's now maybe go a bit bigger. There we go, 200. Yeah, you can see there now that both the bottom and the top of the curve have grown to be quite static to the axis. So if we loosen it up and drop down back to 10, 5, there we go, you can see it grows a little bit softer. So by playing with this figure alone even, we can actually mess around with the shape of the curve quite a lot. Right, the deceleration percentage, as far as I'm aware, all it does really is what the acceleration percentage does to the back end of the curve. It does have an effect on the front end of the curve as well, but say if we drop in, say 70%, you can see that the front end has softened, the back end has softened, but not as much as the front. If we increase that to 95, that as well is making the curve a lot harder. So we can see here at the beginning, we've got, sorry, at the beginning it's quite soft and increases into quite a steep increase and then plateaus. So depending on how much of a plateau you want, or should we say if you want to have a large portion of your journeys to effectively not return much profit at all, and then have the middle end of it to return a lot of profit, then we can make the front and the back end of this curve sharper. The midpoint is as it says on the box. Changing the midpoint will change where this sits. So we increase that to 900. There we go. You can see by moving the midpoint across, we're almost eliminating the plateau we've generated here. There we go, now it's effectively non-existent. Now by changing the midpoint, this is what I meant earlier about being able to generate logarithmic or exponential sort of curves, until we've got something that's quite like that. If we dump, say, 100 in there, well, that's a little bit messy, maybe 300. There we go. We've got something like that, but we've still got this little tail at the beginning. Another thing you can do that I haven't messed around with too much is you can make the acceleration percentage and the deceleration percentage inverse to each other. So you say, make that 50%, make that 60%, and the curve starts to point downwards. 20. So you can see now we've got effectively the opposite. Now I can't see much use for this myself, but it's good to know that it's there, I suppose. And then the base price factors into our final calculations effectively. So if you want to compare this to other models, here you can see the graph is plotted against travel times versus the CS that's been spat out. You can see they've applied a completely different formula. So this is for consumer goods from vanilla. Across the bottom here we've got the distance in time, and then we've got the CS moving across the top. You can tell just by the look of this that they've effectively used a completely different formula. Here we can see Zoria's model of, it's quite interesting actually, you can see the tiering that he's used with all these different lines here. Again, I don't know, I don't think anybody will ever know Zoria's formula, but I'd imagine it's based off something quite similar to the vanilla formula as well. So the whole point of this is that we have a single point of origin, whereas with this we can have multiple points of origin. That's why this looks like a mess, and that's why this has got a single nice curved line. So if you've got any questions, feel free to drop me a message, and I'll do my best to answer them. Just be aware that even I don't still fully understand what this curve does, but hopefully it will give us a lot of interesting results when we finally release the mod.